Hello, world. This is Tommy Hagewood coming to you from Leesburg, Florida, lakefront city in the Sunshine State. It's 83 degrees on a sunny day, on the way up to 90. This is Wednesday, May the 20th, 2020. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I was in a gospel meeting years ago in a small country church in Dixon County, Tennessee. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were having a potluck in an old frame building that had been at one time a one-room schoolhouse, but had been converted into a community center. One of the older men was explaining to me how he had attended the school several years before. He said they had a rather stern schoolmaster. One day the man told me he came in late and was explaining to the schoolmaster why he was tardy, but the schoolmaster stopped him and said, "I don't want to hear it. Anyone who's good at making excuses is usually not good at anything else." That sounds a little harsh to me. There are times when we may have valid excuses for our behavior, while at other times we do not. Like the time the fellow asked his friend if he could borrow his rope. The man said no. When he asked why, he replied, "Because I need it myself to tie up some eggs." "What do you mean you need to tie up some eggs?" Well, the man replied, "I really don't need it for that, but I don't want you to use my rope, and one excuse is just as good as another." Invalid excuses have been described as lies wrapped up in tissue paper. We have no excuse for not believing in God and for not believing what God says in His Word. We're told in Romans 1 that the Gentiles were without excuse for their denial of God during the Old Testament times because they could see God's eternal power and deity through the creation itself. Romans chapter 1 verses 19 and 20. Although they knew God, they glorified Him not as God and were not thankful for His blessings, according to Romans chapter 1 and verse 21. God gave them up to their vile passions, and they sank into the cesspool of sin as low as you can go. Read Romans 1:22 through 32 for yourself. It sounds like today's newspaper. They had absolutely no excuse for their sinful living. The people I just described had no excuse for their ungodly behavior, and neither will we at the judgment. Consider the following 3 reasons why God has left us without excuse for rejecting Him and His will for our lives. Number 1, God has a will. Number 2, He has revealed that will. And number 3, His will for our salvation is easily understood. Now imagine this, standing before God on Judgment Day and asking Him if He had a will. He is not going to say, "Why, no, I didn't have a will, did I? You have a valid excuse. Come on into heaven." That is not going to happen. God has a will. Then imagine saying, "Well, God, did you reveal your will?" And God replying, "Well, no, I didn't reveal my will. You have a valid excuse. Come on in." That is not going to happen. God has revealed His will according to Galatians 1:11 and 12 and 1 Corinthians 2:6 through 14. If you were to say, "But God, your will was too complicated, and I couldn't understand it," He's not going to say, "I see your point, come on in." Again, that is not going to happen. God has a will, He's revealed it to mankind, and He's made it so simple that about 3,000 people heard it, believed it, and were baptized into Christ for remission of their sins, which included crucifying the Son of God, according to Acts chapter 2. Verse 42 tells us they continued steadfastly in the apostles' teaching or in the will of God. Many thousands more have heard the simple gospel of Christ and have obeyed it and have lived and died obedient to its teaching since then. We have no excuse and will have none on the judgment day for not doing the same. We can't blame the preacher or anyone else but ourselves if we miss heaven because we'd rather do our own will than to submit to God's will. We won't be able to use the excuse of not having enough time either. God has been long-suffering towards us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. 2 Peter 3 and verse 9. He has warned us in His Word that life is uncertain, that death is sure, and that eternity is long, forever. James chapter 4, 13 through 17, Hebrews 9:27, Matthew 25:41 and 46. Friend, don't waste your life in sin apart from God who loves you and sent His Son to die for you, paying a debt that He did not owe to save you from a debt that you could not pay. Don't spend your life apart from the people of God who want to help you and to be helped by you to get to heaven. In Romans 8 and 32, we're told that God did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all. What makes you think he'll spare you? Excuses at the judgment day will be as ridiculous and useless as the man who wanted his rope to tie up some eggs. Remember, search the Scriptures, serve the Lord, and share the gospel with others. Till next time, this is Tommy Hagewood wishing for you a very pleasant good day.